Hello and welcome to the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast, the show all about psychology and changing behaviour. And my name is Jamie West, and I am joined as always, by Professor Emeritus Robert West. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, Jamie. Just spent a few weeks in my favourite place on the planet, which is a little town north of Lisbon, which I won't say the name of it because it's already getting, if anything, too crowded with people, which is to say not very crowded at all compared with London, but it's an absolutely gorgeous place. I love Portugal.
And it's hot there, is it still?
It's warm. It's in the 20s. It's very, very pleasant, actually. And one of the things that's very interesting about it, and actually this is true for a lot of places in sort of small towns in Portugal, is that they have really good restaurants. It's like when you go outside London or the main metropolitan areas to sort of, towns like, shall we say, Staines, where I grew up, for example. And
be careful now, the people of Staines, they're going to be listening to this because, they may have just suddenly got a whole load of restaurants that are super duper. And they'll be like, why have they not recognized that we're now the culinary capital just outside London?
This is probably true, actually, and Staines may not be a good example because it's become Staines on Thames and become quite shishy. But you're hard put to find a really, really top class restaurant. But in this little town, there's two best restaurants I've ever been to, and that's ridiculous and very pleasant.
Well, I'm going to have to be upfront and say that I've been listening to food podcasts. Alia likes food a lot. So now I'm up to speed with a million different places around the country that are fantastic and that need to be checked out. I tried a new food place like a couple of days ago, and it was a sort of a vegan burger thing. Mm-hmm. And it was okay. I think I'm just not really a foodie, really.
You're not,
so
actually.
It's a bit wasted on me, I think.
I remember when you were younger, it was very hard to get you to eat anything.
That's children. That's what most children are like.
I wasn't like that.
Really? Did you eat anything when you were growing up?
Well,
you had Tartex. You used to eat Tartex.
Oh, I did. I actually thought it, because it was spelled in a sort of script, I thought it was Tastex. The R looked like an S. Anyway, it's Tartex, and I still like it.
And what is it? Some kind of grey?
Yeah, it's a grey
sort of sandwich
mushy
spread out of a tube.
Yes,
it looks like. It looks like, what's that stuff that you use, like filler? Yeah. It looks like filler, polyfiller. But it looks worse than that.
In a really disgusting colour. But you probably wouldn't use that colour for polyfiller. But delicious.
Yeah. I didn't find it so, but I did at one point almost get to like it. I was like, I could kind of see where you were coming from. It's like, it's kind of got this chemical sort of flavour that eventually could become Moorish.
Yes, you never really made it there.
Anyway, so we are still looking at decision-making, and we are looking at decision-making sort of very much in the round, and we're looking at the background to how we make decisions, how we form impressions, and that's what the recent clutch of episodes have been about. And today we're going to move on to talking about bias, which is a massive area. So it may take us a little while to go through, but it's absolutely worth it because there's so much interest in how the human brain, it's been studied a lot, how the human brain has many biases. And many of us, we've talked about confirmation bias a number of times, but there are other ones as well. And even just within things like confirmation bias, they're worth exploring and unpacking a lot because it comes up so often in so many areas. And each time you circle round, you find you learn a little bit more. So, okay, Professor Emeritus Robert, what is bias?
Yeah, so bias is not the same as error. Bias and error need to be distinguished from each other. Bias is a systematic deviation from accuracy, from an accurate judgment or an accurate impression or an accurate belief in a particular direction, rather than just getting it wrong, you're getting it wrong in a particular way. And obviously we all make mistakes. Our judgments are all more or less, or can be more or less inaccurate. But one of the reasons that we pay such a lot of attention to bias is because, we have developed quite a good understanding of where it's coming from and so on, so that we can help to mitigate it. But also because it sends our decisions down particular routes that are generally maladaptive. So if you make errors of judgment, and half the time it goes one way and half the time it goes another way and so on, but you're essentially on average getting them pretty much right, or you're sort of, they're clustered around an accurate judgment or belief or impression. It's in many ways arguably not as bad as if you're systematically forming judgments that go in a direction that is inaccurate in a particular way, because that's consistently going to send you off in a direction that is maladaptive.
But I want to pick you up on that, because obviously these biases have usually developed, I imagine, if we're thinking about it from an evolutionary perspective, these biases have evolved. So actually they must have, I'm assuming, an adaptive quality in certain key cases.
Yes, and this has been a very, very much the work, the focus of work of people like Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, who link biases with what are known as heuristics. That's rules of thumb. And their proposition is that a lot of these biases occur because we're not really in a position to work out what the answers are to key problems, and when we're forming judgments about the likelihood of something occurring and so on. We just don't have the information or the mental capacity, or sometimes maybe even the time to do it. So we use rules of thumb. And the biases emerge out of the fact that those are just rules of thumb, which work a lot of the time and do a good enough job, but sometimes send us down incorrect pathways. But that's just one source of bias. Other sorts of biases are motivational. They're not due to the fact that we don't have the wherewithal to come up with a fully accurate, worked out answer to an issue. They come from the fact that there's certain things that we want to be the case or need to be the case, and that's influencing our judgments. Now, you could say that even in those cases, the motivated biases, should we call them, that there's a reason for them. Like, for example, being over-optimistic about something. If you think, if you take a sort of a biased view of the world, which is things are going to turn out better than they actually do, then you can think, well, that serves a function. It keeps your morale high and so on. And I think that's potentially an arguable position, but it doesn't get away from the fact that in particular circumstances, most circumstances, it's much better to form judgments that are accurate than ones that are inaccurate. So if you're let's say you have a particular need or desire to believe the propositions of certain politicians because you like them and they seem to be like you, they're your kind of person, and so on. And so things that other politicians would say who you don't associate with or identify with, you would be more critical of, but you're not critical, you're too accepting of the views of these politicians that you identify with, is going to send you down you're going to form beliefs that are just wrong, inaccurate. Of course, we all know pretty much who we're talking about here. Then it's not going to end well, to be honest.
So yeah, that's one example, and I see where you're coming from there. But I think about this quite a lot as I'm watching cricket matches or any sporting, say, team event, or really any sporting event, almost. So if you've got a cricket team, and cricket's quite a long game often, even the shorter form can be about 3 hours often.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'm always amazed when they go and do the dugout interviews with the players at halftime. It's not called halftime, but in the innings break, when the players, and it may look like the team is really down, like they're being thrashed, but it's not just that. Oftentimes you see the players being interviewed, and of course part of them knows that the game is tipping very much against them, but they cannot afford to be thinking in terms of, they have to be optimistic.
Yeah.
They have to think, we can still win this. And the truth is, they can still win it. And sometimes they do. So even though that optimism will be misplaced, well, I would say misplaced, even though it will be sort of factually wrong a number of times, it still serves a huge, it's a deliberate sort of bias, I suppose, that they're encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. And in situations like that, I think it's the same with war, the same with politics. You've got to believe that you can win. Imagine in 1940 when things were looking very bleak for Britain, if we'd been frankly realistic and said, well, actually, things are looking really bad here. I'm not sure that we can win. It would have been a very different outcome. And so the sort of, the Hollywood concept of the 1,000,000-to-1 shot that always seems to pay off in Hollywood films, is something that where the stakes are high, let's say, and where giving up on something is going to be maladaptive, because it really is worth persevering with something, even when the chances of success may be low, then an optimism bias can be helpful. But let's take another kind of situation where it's extremely unhelpful, and that is in gambling, where gamblers, characteristically suffer from a ludicrous optimism bias, which basically bankrupts them. So I guess what we're saying is that you're right, that certain biases in certain situations can be adaptive, but a lot of the time, and I would argue pretty much most of the time, they're very much maladaptive, and we should aim for accuracy in our judgments when we're making decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that we're trying to align our view of reality with reality, and then we'll be better equipped to deal with said reality.
Yeah.
So let's delve a bit deeper into what we're calling a motivated bias, motivated reasoning. And so, as I understand it, this is where we justify beliefs or behaviors that make us feel better or support our identity.
Yes, that's right. And it can work in any number of ways. The thing to think about, really the starting point for it, for anyone wanting to analyze it in themselves or other people, is whenever you formulate a belief about something, think about, what do you want to believe or need to believe? And it could be that you want or need to believe that the world is a fair place, or it could be that you want or need to believe that someone who you despise has done something terrible, or you want or need to believe that someone who you like has not done something terrible. Or it doesn't matter what it is. Just think about, that's the starting point, is when you're trying to identify the potential for this bias, is what do I want or need to believe? Or what does this person want or need to believe? And then you're in a position to be able to say, okay, to what extent is their belief driven by that, as opposed to an objective analysis of the evidence before them?
I was about to say that this is where evidence comes in this is where evidence is so important. And especially if we're talking about the kind of motivated reasoning that can occur in groups and companies where actually, or government agencies, things like that, where you can hopefully have data, you can have evidence. But of course, we also know that data and evidence can be read in different ways. And the way that we view that evidence and data is through our filter of our own motivated reasoning, isn't it? We've got a filter before we look at the evidence.
Absolutely, and so you can begin to see how easy it is, even in the sort of circles that I move in sort of scientific discourse, for people's motivations to influence even what you might imagine would be hard, your interpretation of hard facts and hard evidence, is that everything is potentially, even the evidence of your own senses is potentially negotiable, is potentially interpretable in different ways. And so at the very least, what I think we must do, and certainly what I feel my colleagues and I must do, working in behavioral science, for example, is to be reflective about it, to say, is my reading of the evidence driven by my desires? Is my selection of the evidence? There's so many different ways in which bias can creep in, not just in how you view the evidence, but even in what evidence you choose to view, or what evidence you're exposed to. And this can make a massive difference, because, I see this in when you see reviews of the scientific literature on issues that are contentious, is that reviews, even with all of the sort of safeguards and guidelines and things that we see, reviews in these areas so often select studies based on preconceptions about what the outcomes should be, what you want the outcomes to be. And it's shocking, and it's sad, and it's disappointing, but I'm afraid it's still true.
I suppose we just have strong wants and needs. We have strong emotions, and they impact us. I think what sometimes I find interesting is that genuinely, when we're in the grip of motivated reasoning, we're in the grip of a bias, we often don't feel like we are. In fact, we feel sometimes quite strongly that we're absolutely not.
Absolutely true. What you say is so true. I'm thinking of an example right now that I daren't mention because it's very topical, but where a group of people working in a certain field are unbelievably blind to the such obvious bias resulting from the position that they're in and the kind of work that they do and so on, because and not that, but are so incredibly judgmental about everyone else who does not hold the same position, and are so pure. It's the sort of it's a sort of Spanish Inquisition type of certainty in the truth of their position. And of course, this is a human thing. You see it in religion, you see it in a lot of value judgments that are made, but you also see it in science, and you see it in our personal lives as well. So you're absolutely right that we are not when we feel absolutely certain about something, a particular position, that is when we should be most concerned about the fact that our views might be influenced by our desires.
Yeah, and I mean it's in ourselves, it's in other people. It's just easier to see when it's in someone else. You go, wow, how could you not see this? And they're thinking exactly the same thing about you. How can you not see this? I've been reading some Tolstoy recently, and one of the things he was very good at, particularly in his early and mid novels, was able to get into anybody's head and to say what they were thinking and to pick out and explain their or not explain it, but to depict their psychology and their biases and where they were coming from. And then to pull back out from, say, I don't know, like a princess character or something, and then go into just a soldier, an ordinary soldier, and then go into someone who's like an officer. And he could go into everybody's head. I think that was why one of the reasons he was such a genius was that is a very rare skill to have, because naturally we are evolved to push our own agenda, to protect ourselves. And I think when we're looking at improving our understanding of biases, it is still primarily from a self-interested perspective, in that actually a lot of biases are causing us harm individually. So it is still very much, for Tolstoy, this helps him write a better book and a more realistic book. But for us in general, like having a better grasp of reality, hopefully will help us interact better with reality and the elements within reality, the objects and the people around us.
Absolutely. And ourselves individually, but also our families and our communities and so on. To get a little bit political, I think
I'm getting anxious.
I can see Jamie getting worried now. But fortunately, he can actually delete this if he doesn't like it.
Can and will.
Before it goes out. So it is that in democracies where, in theory, people who, let's say, can vote in their own self-interest can choose governments that then would act in the interests of the majority of people, as opposed to a few rich and powerful people, we still seem to keep ending up with governments that act primarily in the interests of rich and powerful people. And the question is, how on earth does that happen? What's going on? Is it that, as the rich and the powerful would argue, well, if you look after our interests, we'll look, that's the best way to look after your interests, this sort of trickle-down economics type of approach, which, clearly, on the evidence of economics is not been effective.
It does trickle. It does trickle a lot of times. Not all the time. It does trickle
again. But anyway, the point I'm going to make is that in order to be able to stay in power, the rich and the powerful, shall we call them, have to get people to vote essentially against their own personal interests and in favor of the rich and the powerful's interests. And so what they have to do is they have to work on people's biases, on their difficulties that they have in forming judgments about what's in their best interests. And so these kind of things make a huge, it could not be more important. It affects whether countries go to war. It affects whether countries spend resources on things that make a difference to them at home, their housing and their health services and so on, as opposed to weapons to go and murder people, in other countries. So it could not be more important in politics to find ways in which we can help people to be more accurate in our judgments about the kind of policies and the kind of economics and so on that politicians are offering us.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, people do vary a lot in the kind of society and things that they actually want at all different kinds of levels, both due to our sort of innate psychology and also learned what we've sort of been brought up with, and then maybe what we learn later in life. So yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? That's throwing a big one there. I think what it makes me think of is that when it comes to these political beliefs, and we're talking about we believe what we want to believe. I think one example is somebody who loves cars, petrol cars, will be less inclined to be in favor, potentially, of policies that will help combat climate change and emissions. So we're in this bind, we're in this cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, and cognitive dissonance, which we've mentioned before, is such an incredibly powerful source of bias in our judgments because of this need to believe what we want to believe and things that sort of favor our worldview or our immediate, as we see it, happiness and enjoyment, and our value systems and our identities. So, yeah, I mean, I think you can think of plenty of examples. I mean, let's take another one that you and I often discuss, and is related to our life choices, and that is vegetarianism and meat and eating meat. And it is interesting to me to see good people, people with good, who are nice, kind, generous, empathic people who don't feel in any way troubled by eating mammals. They're people who may have pets and love their pets, but somehow, and they like bar lambs frolicking around in the fields and so on. So, but to be able to eat a sentient creature, by sentient I don't mean sapient, I mean a creature that evidently feels things, feels fear, feels happiness, feels sadness, and so on. Being able to sort of kill and eat something like that. You've got to, you've got to believe that it's okay. Otherwise you'd feel terrible about it. But we can. I think personally, I predict that in 50 odd years' time, if the human species is still going, that that we would probably revisit that, and people mostly won't be thinking that that's okay. But whether listeners believe it's okay or not is not the issue here. What we're interested in is how our feelings, our desires, what we enjoy, and so on, influences our judgments about the facts of the matter, about whether animals can feel pain and fear and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I imagine that listeners who, someone might look at, I'm vegetarian, but someone who's vegan may look at me and go, oh, how can Jamie do that? Eat eggs or have milk. And I know vegans who feel very strongly that way. And I think a lot comes into play there. Of course, norms, historically, how we have had to sort of farm and feed ourselves and what was available and so on. And then also a sense of animals eat other animals. Yeah, there are so many reasons that people will be thinking of in their minds and going, well, this is why I do this. And people have very different ways of approaching resolving some of that potential cognitive dissonance, which might just be to accept it. Some people just go, I just don't think about that.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point. And it is a very important point to say that bias is not just about what we believe and what the accuracy of the judgments we make. It's also about the things that we include in our beliefs. So cognitive dissonance, one of the ways in which we address problems with cognitive dissonance is to not think about things. You say, well, just don't, I know. You don't have to tell me that there's a problem here, but, I just don't want to think about it. And that is also a bias. So bias occurs not just in the judgments, the nature of the judgments we make and the beliefs that we hold, but also whether we even make those judgments in the first place or hold those beliefs.
Yeah. And, guess what? We've barely scratched the surface. We've reached the end of this episode. So I know this is going to roll over into the next one. So for this episode, it remains for me to say thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you, Jamie.
And thank you for listening. And remember to subscribe and like and follow the podcast. And you can buy our books. The links are in the description. I've been Jamie West, and we look forward to joining you next time on the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast.